All right, welcome back. Hope you're having a great week. Today we're continuing our RBT exam review with our latest RBT practice exam. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for our proven study materials, please check out btexamreview.com. We offer 3 practice exams, a task list, study guide, and of course our famous combo pack. As always, questions, comments, let us know. Let us know when you pass. We also have a YouTube membership now if you would like to support us further. As always, work hard. Study hard. Let's get to our questions. Question 1. Santa is making his list and checking it twice. Once he checks it twice, he gives it to his elves to prepare his sleigh with all the toys. Santa then checks to make sure all the toys are there. Santa is using what type of measurement? Okay, so Santa has made his list, he's checked it twice, and now he's passed his list off to the elves. And we're trying to figure out what type of measurement Santa used to do what? Well, to make sure all the toys are there. Half the battle with some of these questions is making sure you're identifying what behavior we're looking at, whose behavior we're looking at. If you can identify those first, you're going to have a much better chance of getting the question correctly. So we're looking at Santa's behavior of measuring if all the toys are there. So what is your prediction here? If he's made a list, he then gives the list to the elves who prepare the sleigh. Santa then comes behind them just to make sure all the toys are there. Was Santa sitting there observing all the elves and everything they were doing, putting the toys in the sleigh? No, he had a list. He gave it to them. He let them do their job. And then he came behind them and he can easily see, is it done? Is it not? So what type of measurement is that? A, play check. A planned activity check, remember, is a type of momentary time sampling, but just in a group format. Santa is not using momentary time sampling here, right? He's not using interval recording. He's not using time sampling. He's using a different sort of measurement. So it's not play check. B, permanent product. What is Santa measuring? Well, Santa is measuring the product or what the elves have produced. And he's done that by coming behind them and just checking on their behavior. The elves' behavior produced a full sleigh, hopefully. That is the idea with permanent product. You don't actually have to watch every instance of behavior occurring to measure it. And that's what Santa's doing. He's doing a permanent product check. Frequency, did Santa count the toys? It doesn't say that, right? It doesn't say Santa was counting the toys. He's just checking to make sure they're all there. And then whole interval. Remember, it's not a discontinuous measurement, not momentary time sampling, it's not interval recording. Santa is using a permanent product check based on his list to make sure they've completed everything he asked them to prepare. Question 2. A skill acquisition plan is created to teach a client to use an ATM. The client is taught using a chaining procedure and is able to use their card at a fake ATM machine at their house. What should the next step be in the plan? Think about this one a little bit, okay? It's a little harder, but you can do it. So think about our skill acquisition plans. When we create them, we pick goals and we pick skills we want to create and teach, and then we're going to try to come up with an idea of what that skill is going to look like after it's all said and done. And a crucial part of that plan is always generalization. Generalization occurs when a skill happens outside of the teaching environment. If we're not generalizing, we're not truly doing our job. So in this case, we have our plan. Our goal is to get our client to use an ATM. We have our procedure, which is chaining, and we get them to the point where they can do the behavior in their house. But is using their card at a fake ATM machine gonna be socially valid and gonna be useful if they can't do it elsewhere? No. So after we've gotten to the point where they can actually do the skill in a controlled environment, in a learning environment, what's next? A, teach the client to budget their earnings. Well, we still need to make sure what? Still need to make sure they can use an ATM outside of the house, right? We're not quite to budgeting earnings yet if they still can't get money out of an ATM. B, teach the client how to apply for jobs. Jobs really has nothing to do with the ATM machine. Again, that's kind of jumping ahead. That's a different skill. We're focused on this plan, right? What's the next step in this plan? C, have the client use the ATM at a bank. Here we go. Now we are looking at what? Now we're looking at generalization. We've taught you the skill. Can you go ahead and generalize it outside of the house? And then D, have the client write out a reminder checklist for using the ATM. Is that really going to show us he can generalize? No, he's just creating a prompt, right? We need him to be able to just on his own go to an ATM outside of the house and use it. So the next step after we've mastered this part is generalize. And how are we going to generalize? We're going to have the client use an ATM at, let's say, a bank. If a functional behavior assessment indicates that the learner's behavior is occurring to access a tangible, how would you likely put the behavior on extinction? Slow down and read this one and make sure we understand it. If a functional behavior assessment indicates the learner's behavior is occurring to access a tangible. So our function is what? Accessing a tangible. The question is asking us, how are we going to put that behavior on extinction? So you have to think about extinction. With extinction, we're withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. So what does the function tell us about extinction? Well, it identifies where we need to withhold reinforcement. If our function is accessing a tangible, we're going to need to do what? We're going to need to prevent access to that tangible, right? So that's how we're going to try to put the behavior on extinction. So A, anytime the learner asks for an item, ignore the request. Now, careful here. Yes, ignoring the request might be denying access to tangibles in that moment, but by ignoring the request, we're really just denying attention. We can still acknowledge the request, we just have to withhold tangible. So A is okay, it's just not fully complete. If we ignore the request and they still get access, we haven't really done extinction. B, whenever the learner attempts to obtain the item, withhold access. This is much more clear, much more complete. Anytime the learner attempts to obtain the item through maybe poor behavior, by asking for it, by taking it without permission, we have to withhold access. B is just much more complete than A. A gives us one scenario, which could be also withholding attention. They could still get access. B is saying no matter what, we're withholding access and in turn, withholding reinforcement. Always read all of your answer choices. C, prevent the sensory sensation of the behavior from occurring. When we prevent the sensory sensation, we're putting automatic behavior on extinction. And then D, follow through when a task demand is placed on the learner. When we follow through with a task demand, we are putting escape avoidance on extinction. So how are we going to put this behavior on extinction for accessing a tangible? Well, B, whenever the learner attempts to obtain the item, withhold access. Full stop. Blaine is sitting across from Tony. Blaine looks at Tony, says, what is 2 plus 4? Tony says 7. If Blaine is using discrete trial teaching and wants to use a visual prompt, how should he respond? All right, whose behavior are we looking at? We're looking at Blaine. And what is Blaine doing? Blaine is using discrete trial teaching. He wants to use a visual prompt, and now he needs to respond to Tony. So what is the setup? Well, he looks at Tony and says, what is 2 plus 4? Tony says 7. So Tony's given the response. Blaine now has to follow the response. How does he respond? Remember, he wants to use the visual prompt. A, give corrective feedback and reintroduce the SD. Okay, but what are we missing with A? Well, he didn't use his prompt. We have to use our visual prompt because that's what the question is indicating. B, give corrective feedback, give the visual prompt, and reintroduce the SD. At one point in DTT does the prompt occur? Does it occur as a consequence, or does it occur before the response? What occurs before the response, right? The typical order is going to be SD, prompt, response, consequence. In this case, we have consequence, prompt, SD. It's not the right order. The prompt follows the SD. C, give the visual prompt and reintroduce the SD. Again, visual prompts or any prompts follow the SD. SD and then prompt. D, give corrective feedback, good, consequence. Reintroduce the SD, good, and then give the prompt. D is the right order. We have our response, 7. We give corrective feedback, the consequence. We reintroduce the SD, and then we prompt. It's very important you know the order of when the prompt occurs. The prompt follows the SD, but comes before the response. How would you explain shaping to a parent who does not know anything about applied behavior analysis? And this is meeting our guideline for not using jargon and not using technical language. You need to get good at explaining ABA terms in very common, understandable language where anybody listening can understand what you're talking about. In this case, we want to explain shaping. So you have to explain it to someone who knows nothing about applied behavior analysis, meaning we're going to avoid technical terms and jargon that only we understand. So what is shaping? Well, shaping, we are picking a behavior, right? Reinforcing approximations of that behavior until we reach a terminal behavior. Now, that's a very complex technical answer, right? Because we're going to positively reinforce or negatively reinforce. We're going to reinforce approximations for the terminal behavior. But that's not how we want to explain it, right? We need to explain it much more simply. So each time your child gets closer to the final behavior, we will reward them. That sounds exactly like what we're talking about. Each time your child gets closer, approximations, to the final behavior or terminal behavior, we will reward them, reinforce. Anybody can understand that. This is a really good, simple explanation of shaping. B, for each successive approximation, stop right there. Do they know what a successive approximation is? Probably not, right? That is jargon, that's technical. Avoid that. C, positive reinforcement will be used every time your child gets closer to the terminal behavior. Still, we have positive reinforcement and terminal behavior. You're now just introducing more things you need to explain. The question is, what is shaping? You need to be able to explain shaping without following up with 20 more explanations, right? If you just say each time your child gets closer to the final behavior, we're going to reward them, everybody knows what you're talking about. D, we picked a terminal behavior problem and we'll be reinforcing successive approximations towards that behavior. This is a great definition of shaping, but it's technical, it's jargon-filled. We might understand it. People who know nothing about ABA do not. If we're going to explain it to someone who knows nothing about ABA, we need to keep it simple. Each time your child gets closer, approximations, to the final behavior, terminal behavior, we will reward them, reinforcement. Whenever a supervisor or another RBT refers to anecdotal data, what do they mean? What is anecdotal data? We hear that term a lot, right? Anecdotal data is not all that useful because it's what? It's really personal opinion, right? It's just what you kind of observed and thought. So whenever your supervisor or another RBT refers to anecdotal data, what are they talking about? A, data that was taken the previous year. Well, maybe, but anecdotal data isn't really taken, right? It's more of an observation and an opinion. B, data that was taken prior to treatment. Again, anecdotal data is not really necessarily tracked and taken, right? Unless you're writing it down, and even then, it's not very scientific. Anecdotal data is really based on personal observation. So no matter if you write it down, if you don't write it down, however you remember it, however you don't remember it, it's really just based on personal observation. It's not all that useful. And then D, data taken after an intervention is over. That would be maintenance data. So anecdotal data is really personal observation based. What do you think? What did you feel? What did you see? Not that scientific, not super useful. We should not be making our decisions on anecdotal data. Who is primarily responsible for ensuring RBTs receive enough supervision and renew their competency assessments on time? This one is very obvious. Do not overthink it. Who's responsible for you, the RBT, receiving enough supervision and renewing your assessment on time? Whose personal responsibility is that? Is it your BCBA's responsibility? It is not. They need to be sure your supervision is adequate, that you're providing good services, but it's not their responsibility to make sure you do everything necessary to maintain your status as an RBT. What about the BACB? It's definitely not the BACB, right? They're not responsible at all, really, for what happens in your own practice, all right? You have to submit all these documents to them, and they have to continue to approve them, but they're not responsible for ensuring you get them done. Who's responsible for ensuring you get enough supervision and you get your competency assessments renewed? It's going to be you. It's your responsibility solely. All right. We can't blame others if we don't get enough supervision, if we don't renew our competency. You have to go out your way, keep track of these things, and try until you're successful. Who's primarily responsible for making sure you get enough supervision as an RBT and that you renew your competency on time? Well, it's going to be you, the RBT. Which of the following statements is true about an extinction procedure? So let's think about extinction. We talked about it a little earlier. Extinction is just withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. When we think about extinction, we think about extinction bursts and spontaneous recovery and that kind of thing. This question is asking about true statements. So one of these is true, 3 is false. A, response blocking is an effective method of extinction. Is response blocking considered extinction? It is not. In order to be extinction, the learner has to have the opportunity to engage in the response. Excuse me. If you block the response, it is not extinction. B, extinction is a type of punishment procedure. No, extinction is its own type of procedure. We have reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. That's our 3 major types, right? Extinction and punishment are 2 different things. C, behavior can occur even after extinction was successful. Absolutely. And what do we call that? Well, we call that spontaneous recovery, right? Spontaneous recovery, the sudden reemergence of a behavior that was previously extinguished or put in extinction. And then D, extinction must be done for several months in order to be effective. Not true. Extinction is dependent on a lot of factors. How well it's implemented, how often it's implemented, how consistently it's implemented, previous reinforcement schedules, reinforcement history. Many, many factors go into it. Sometimes extinction works immediately. Sometimes it does take a very long time. But this is a very definitive statement that just isn't always true. What is true, though, is that behavior can always occur even after extinction was successful. Spontaneous recovery is something that can occur whenever, right? The behavior's been gone for a long time, and all of a sudden, it comes back. Billy needs to save some money. He thinks he's going out with his friends too often during the week. In order to change his going out habits, what does he need to reduce? What does Billy need to worry about as far as going out every week? He's going out too much, right? So his frequency is too high. If he's going out 5 nights a week, he needs to reduce that. Well, we don't have frequency as an answer choice. But what do we have as an answer choice, which is like kind of a proxy of frequency? We have rate. And rate is what? Rate is just frequency with a time component added, right? So even though we don't have frequency, if we reduce the rate, he's now reducing what? Well, he's reducing how many times a week he goes out, which is accomplishing the same goal. Latency doesn't get him there because that's just a single response. Into response time, he probably needs to increase into response time. In duration, we're not looking at the total time of anything. Billy needs to reduce how many times per week he goes out. And that's perfect for rate, right? We have our frequency, how many, and then our time, week, how many times per week. Great. Glad you watched. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com. As always, work hard, study hard. We'll see you soon.